Every evening at 6 o'clock, Eleanor Brooks set the table for two. And more nights than anyone in Maple Hollow ever knew, she ate alone across from an empty plate. She lived in a small white cottage at the end of Willow Street, where lavender grew along the porch and an old maple leaned toward the roof as if listening. Samuel had been gone 12 years. The town knew her as the widow who ran the library book sale and never missed a funeral casserole. What the town did not know was why a second plate came out of the cupboard every single night, whether anyone was coming or not. Some said she'd never really accepted he was gone. Others called it a private grief ritual, a way of keeping the last familiar thing in her life. No one asked her outright, because Eleanor didn't look like a woman dragging grief behind her. She waved at cars she didn't recognize, laughed easily with the kids outside the library. Only at 6 did anything look strange. On a wet Tuesday in October, a delivery bike skidded across a carpet of leaves on Willow Street and went down hard. A carton of eggs cracked against the curb. Apples rolled into the gutter. Daniel Moore sat in the rain next to his bike, soaked and furious at nothing in particular. He'd landed in Maple Hollow a month earlier, one semester short of a degree he could no longer afford, working 2 jobs and renting a room above the hardware store. He told people he was taking a break. The truth was closer to hiding. Eleanor came out with a green umbrella before he'd even gotten up. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride. That usually heals faster than a scraped knee." She held the umbrella over the eggs, not him, which made him laugh despite himself. They gathered what hadn't broken. She told him to come dry off. He said he had a route to finish. She said the route could wait 10 minutes, and something about the way she said it, not kindly exactly, just certain, got him through her door. The kitchen smelled like bread. The table was set for 2. "Someone's coming," Daniel said, hovering in the doorway. Eleanor checked the clock. 5:58. Someone already has. She pulled out the second chair and didn't explain further, which he found more unsettling than if she had. He ate because it was easier than arguing. The soup was good. The quiet in the house didn't feel like the quiet in his rented room. That one pressed on him. This one just sat there, patient. "What did you study?" she asked, halfway through. "Architecture." "You say it like it happened to somebody else." "I had to leave. For now. Maybe for good." He didn't look up from the bowl. Eleanor broke a piece of bread and set it on his plate without asking. "Sometimes life doesn't ask us to start over," she said. "Sometimes it only asks us to begin again from a different place." He didn't answer, but he carried the words out the door with him, the way you carry a stone in your pocket without meaning to. He came back the next Tuesday with her soup container, washed a full week before he needed to. "You live on the other side of town," Eleanor said. "I was in the neighborhood." "Dinner's in 10 minutes. He didn't finish that degree on the schedule he'd planned. It took him 3 more years, a different city, and a night class he almost quit twice. But he kept a photograph of Willow Street taped inside his first drafting table. And when people asked why, he'd just say there was a woman who once told him beginning again wasn't the same as failing, and leave it at that. Carla Bennett showed up in January in blue scrubs, with her hair coming out of its knot. 16 hours into a shift that wouldn't end. Her car dead 2 streets over and her phone dead with it. "I just need your phone," she said, already halfway to leaving again. "Kitchen's this way." Eleanor didn't move from the doorway. "I really can't stay. I'd hate to interrupt dinner." "The only real interruption to dinner," Eleanor said, "is eating it alone." Carla used the phone. She stood in the hall while she waited for her ride, arms crossed, glancing at the table set for two like it was a trap. Eleanor didn't invite her to sit. She just kept moving between stove and counter, talking about nothing. A robin that had nested in the mailbox, a recipe that never turned out the same way twice, until Carla, without quite deciding to, sat down at the edge of the second chair, still in her coat. She didn't say much that night. She ate half a plate of chicken standing up, then sitting, checked her phone twice, and left before dessert with a clipped thanks that didn't invite a response. She didn't come back for 3 weeks. When she did, it was on a night she hadn't planned to. She just found herself parked outside the cottage after another double shift, engine running, for almost 10 minutes before she turned it off. This time she sat all the way down. She talked about lonely patients and frightened families, and going home each night to an apartment where no one asked how her day had been. About a man who died alone that week because his daughter got stuck in traffic, and how Carla had sat with him instead, and how nobody had thought to ask her how that felt. She hadn't known she needed to say it out loud until she was already saying it. Eleanor listened without rushing to fill the quiet. "I'm sorry," Carla said eventually. "I don't usually talk this much." "Most people don't need advice," Eleanor said, pouring more tea. "They need somewhere safe enough to finish a sentence." Carla's eyes filled. She didn't cry, not quite. And she didn't come every week after. Some months she didn't come at all. But when things got bad enough, she knew where 6 o'clock was. And that was its own kind of promise. Jacob Miller was 15 and stood outside Eleanor's door for almost 10 minutes before he knocked, which she only found out later because a neighbor mentioned seeing him pace. "My teacher said you sometimes have extra food." He said it like a challenge, like he was daring her to make it weird. "I made too much stew." "You don't have to lie to me." "I'm not," Eleanor said, holding the door open. "I made exactly enough. I just didn't know for who yet." He didn't trust that answer, and he said so twice before he came in. He ate fast, didn't thank her, and told her the stew was fine, which, from a 15-year-old she'd learned, was practically a toast. His parents had split. His father was 2 hours away and might as well have been on the moon. His mother worked evenings, and Jacob had gotten efficient at frozen pizza and empty rooms. He didn't say any of this at dinner. He said it in pieces, over months, mostly with his back turned while drying dishes, because it was easier to talk to the window than to her face. One night, months in, he finally looked at the second chair like he'd been building up to the question. "Was this where your husband sat?" "Yes." "So why do you let random people sit there?" Eleanor considered lying, the way adults sometimes do to make a story tidier. She didn't. Honestly, some of it's for him. Samuel used to say if your table only has room for people you already know, then it's too small. She turned the teacup once in her hands. And some of it's just, I couldn't stand eating in this kitchen by myself anymore. It got too loud, the quiet did. This was easier than admitting that to anyone. Jacob didn't say anything to that. But he came back the next Wednesday, and the one after, and eventually he stopped waiting outside the door before he knocked. By the time Eleanor was 81, her hands shook enough that she'd started using both to hold a teacup. Jacob, grown now, teaching history 2 towns over, back most weekends, found her one February afternoon staring at an unopened can of soup with the second chair pushed in for the first time he could remember. "You didn't cook?" "Wasn't hungry." "You taught me not to lie at this table." She didn't answer that one. The next evening at 5:55, there was a knock. Jacob, with a pot of stew he'd clearly never made before, judging by the smell. Then Carla, back in town for a conference, with bread from a bakery instead of an oven. Then Daniel driving 3 hours because Carla had called him, with a pie that survived the trip mostly intact. After them came people Eleanor only half recognized. A mechanic, a nurse, a woman who used to deliver her mail. Kids who'd been strangers to her and were strangers no longer. The little house filled up past what it was built for. Someone found folding chairs. Someone else gave up looking for a chair and just sat on the stairs with a plate on their knees. Jacob set down 2 plates, then a third. Then he lost count. "This is a great deal of fuss," Eleanor said, though her eyes had already filled with tears. Daniel raised his glass, a little unsteady. "To the woman who always saved us a seat." The room quieted. "You never just fed us," Carla said. "You gave tired people permission to rest." Daniel nodded. "You reminded us that beginning again wasn't the same as failing." Jacob pulled out the chair across from her. The chair, and didn't try to make it poetic, though it came out that way anyway. "And you taught us that home isn't the place where nothing hurts. It's the place where no one has to hurt alone." Eleanor looked around the room at the faces she knew, and the ones she'd forgotten, and the ones who somehow still remembered her. For 12 years, she'd told herself she was keeping one chair open. It took this many people standing in her hallway to understand she'd been building a table the size of a town, one plate at a time, without ever quite meaning to. She looked at Samuel's photograph on the shelf, laughing by the maple tree, one hand up against the sun. "You were right," she said, quiet enough that only Jacob heard her. There was always another chair. That night, she didn't eat across from an empty plate. She ate surrounded by noise she hadn't heard in her kitchen in 12 years, and nobody hurried home. Afterward, the town worked out a rotation without ever officially deciding to. People still showed up at 6. They still set one extra place, not for Samuel, not for anyone in particular, just for whoever might knock. Eleanor died 3 winters later, in the spring, with the second chair pulled out beside her bed, because Jacob thought she'd want it there and never asked her if that was true. The tradition outlived her the way the good ones do. Quietly, without a name, without anyone deciding to make it official. Families across Maple Hollow began leaving one chair open at their own tables. Some nights it stayed empty. Other nights it held a neighbor. A kid who'd changed schools too many times, a stranger whose car had broken down 2 streets over. And if you ever found yourself alone on Willow Street around 6 o'clock, someone would almost certainly say it to you, the way it had been said to all of them. "Come with me. I know a table where there is always room for one more." Because sometimes the warmest meal isn't the one made with the finest ingredients. Sometimes it is simply the one that reminds you that somewhere in the world, someone has already saved you a seat.